Chapter 37, Saturday, December 14th through Monday, December 23rd, 1776. The distress of the prisoners cannot be communicated in words. 20 or 30 die every day. They lie in heaps unburied. What numbers of my countrymen have died by cold and hunger, perished for want of the common necessaries of life. I have seen it. This, sir, is the boasted British clemency. Letter written from New York, describing prisoners captured at Fort Washington. Lady Seymour regained her strength by the day. I was no longer allowed to spend warm hours in her bedchamber. She took her breakfast and dinner alone, but joined the rest of the company for supper each night. Madame was saddened by her husband's return to health. The next week passed in a kitchen storm of flour and sugar for Christmas was fast approaching. Madame's list of required delicacies was endless: gingerbread, pies of brandied peaches and preserved cherries and mincemeat, macaroons, blancmange, Jordan almond, sugar candy, as many kinds of cake as there were fingers on both hands. I was the dog's body in charge of keeping the oven stocked with wood and the ashes cleared out, and beating eggs 10 at a time till my arms were near to fall off. 2 of the soldier wives got into a terrible squabble the day the woodpile froze. Hannah told Mary it was her turn to fetch home for the buckets from the tea-water pump, and Mary said no, 'twas Hannah's turn. Back and forth they went, the words getting hotter as their tempers grew shorter. I went yesterday, Mary said loudly as she poured boiling water into a basin. You know that for a fact because you told me my nose was the color of a cherry when I came in. Hannah shook her head as she scrubbed the floor. No, that was 2 days ago. Yesterday I slipped on the ice and fell on my backside. Near broke my tailbone, I did. Could barely come up the steps this morning. You're a lying codface, you are, Mary said. Hannah threw the brush into the bucket and water splashed on the floor. Who are you calling a liar? Sarah, the boss lady, came through the door just as Mary rounded the table, her hands balled up in a fist. Sarah was getting close to her time and had a bit of temper herself. She slammed the door so hard the whole house shook. Shut your gob, she shouted. I'll report the pair of you to the Colonial if you don't straighten up. There will be no more brawling or caterwauling in this kitchen. But, they both said. Sarah leveled such a glare at the pair of them I thought their hair would catch fire, and I suddenly saw a way clear to my own purposes. Begging pardon, Miss Sarah, ma'am, I said meekly. What do you want? She said, her eyes still on the other women. I can fetch the tea water, I volunteered. Mary shook her head back and forth. Oh, no, she won't. She'll tarry at the shops to get out of her own chores. Make one of the men do it, I say. I'm the first one awake to build up the fires, I explained. The shops are still closed then. I'll dash up to the pump and be back before the sun comes up. Sarah gave me a suspicious look. Why would you take on extra work, especially with it being so cold and dark in the morning? I was raised in the country, miss. Too much time inside makes me feel poorly. I like walking in the fresh air, even if it is cold. 'Twas mostly a lie, but the tea-water pump was right close to the prison. Fetching water would give me a chance to check on Curzon every day. Hannah picked up her scrub brush and knelt on the floor again. Let her go, I say. Saves us the trouble of freezing our tails off. She dipped the brush in the bucket. Don't know what possessed me to follow my Jimmy to this god-forsaken colony. The next morning found me headed up island long before the sun arose. When I knocked on the guard-house door of the prison, it was opened by a soldier I'd never seen before, a short man with black hair, sky-blue eyes, and a scowl. You can't come in, he said after I explained my errand. Regulations then changed. Tell her about the windows, called another soldier, warming himself by the fire. The regulations permit civilians to deliver food and sundry provisions. But not firewood, added the man at the hearth, yawning. But not firewood, repeated the first man. There will be no regular patrols around the perimeter of the building to ensure the civilians do not tarry overlong in conversation with the prisoners. And we'll be checking on the grub you give 'em, said his companion. Guards will inspect all civilian donations, the first man said firmly. If you deliver contraband items, you will be imprisoned yourself. I shivered once. Are scones and jam contraband? Not yet. But outside I walked around the front of the building, trying to figure out where Curzon's cell lay. Some prisoners were already awake, their hands and arms wrapped in rags sticking through the bars of the window. Curzon's cell lay to the back of the building. I rounded the corner and stopped. This was where the burial pits were dug. The pits were just a little smaller than the cells, dug down the height of a grown man. One of them had already been filled with bodies and covered again with dark mud. Two lay open and empty, sprinkled with snow like sugar on a cake. I did not know how many bodies would fit in each. I shivered again and pulled my cloak tight, then turned my back to the graves and counted the windows. 2, 3, 4, until I came to the window I hoped led to Curzon's. The eastern sky had brightened enough for me to see all around, but inside of the prison was dark. I stepped up to the building. The bottom of the window was just above the top of my head. I stood on tiptoe and stretched my hands up to the bars. "Hello," I called in a hushed voice. "Curzon? Anyone?" The nasty fellow who had tried to steal my bucket on my first visit, Dibdin, leaned his face against the bars. He had a blanket around his shoulders and Curzon's hat upon his head. "Won't let you in no more, eh? They changed the rules. Can you fetch my brother, please?" "Sir?" "He's sleeping." I wanted to pull the bars apart, snatch the hat from his head, and thrash him with my fists and shoes, but that was impossible. I forced honey into my voice in a humble tone. "Well then, may I please speak to your sergeant?" "Sarge is dead." He turned his head and spat. "I'm in charge now. I'll take the victuals you brought." I started to reach into the bucket to hand the scones through the bar, but stopped. "How do I know my brother's not dead too? Wake him, please." Dibdin opened his mouth but closed it without a word. His hunger was stronger than his temper, it seemed. He turned to someone in the cell. "Get the black boy over here." A moment later, Curzon appeared at the window. He was shaking so badly he could barely stand. His eyes half closed, teeth chattering. He had no blanket around him, and there were puke stains on the front of his shirt. His gold earring was missing too. "Curzon, Curzon," I hissed. "What ails you? What can I do?" He did not hear me, or could not. He was insensible of his own name and where he was. Dibdin joined Curzon at the window. "Terrible, ain't it? How fevers and the pox tear through this place?" There was hollow laughter in the cell. "Give him his hat back," I said, "and a blanket. Is he getting his rations?" He did not answer me. That was an answer in itself. The prison was not a place of shared hardship anymore. It was a hole of desperation. "You bloody beast," I swore. "How dare you let him starve?" The words flew out of my mouth without pause. "Who are you to reprimand me, girl?" he snarled, putting his face up to the bars. His breath stank of rotting teeth and snot pooled at the edge of his nostrils. "He's a slave. He will not be treated the same as free men." He wiped his nose with the back of his hand. "But you can remedy that," he said, "with ease." I tried to keep my voice steady. "How so?" Curzon was seized by a fit of coughing so violent I feared his ribs would crack. He choked on his spittle and fought for breath, and then finally relaxed back into his stupor, leaning against the window. Dibdin glanced back at the other men in the cell before continuing. "Our Captain Morse is on patrol, lodged at the Golden Hill Tavern, we hear. Go there, tell him the men have fever and pox. One of our lads, Bridgebane, has a father in Piscastaway with money and influence. If the captain can get word to him, Bridgebane's father could arrange for a proper physician to attend us here." Curzon coughed again and moaned. Sweat glistened on his forehead. "And the doctor would see my brother?" I said. Dibdin hesitated, then gave a nod. "Eh?" "And he gets a blanket and food?" Dibdin said something to a man I couldn't see. A blanket appeared on Curzon's shoulders. Curzon clutched it around himself. "And his hat?" My voice was ice. Dibdin removed the hat and placed it on Curzon's head. "Lay him down," he instructed, "on the rushes, not on the bare floor." Someone helped Curzon away from the window. I had no choice. I handed the jam-covered burnt scones up to the window. Dibdin stuck the first one in his mouth, then passed the others to the men who suddenly crowded the window. "If he dies, you'll not see me again," I warned. "Understood," he said. I found Captain Morse carrying out rubbish for the tavern keeper. He was a well-fed man wearing a brown coat trimmed with white. That signified he was a prisoner of war. There was a big gap between his front teeth, but they looked clean enough. He joined me in the shadows of the alley and listened as I quickly explained my mission. "I'll try to get word to Bridgebane's family tonight. It is against the laws of war to treat prisoners so badly." He paced angrily. "How often can you stop here?" "Every morning." "Good. Tell Dibdin I'll see what I can do to ease their suffering, though I fear it will not be enough." "My brother is among the prisoners," I said. "He's ill. Can I see to it that he is given his share of whatever Bridgebane provides?" "I surely will. Your brother was calm and brave during the final battle. He's a true soldier." The crow of a rooster interrupted him. The sun was fighting through the leaden clouds. I picked up the buckets. "I have to hurry." He nodded. "Thank you for your help. My apologies, but I do not know your name." "I am called Sal." "Do you carry a last name as well, Sal?" I hesitated. According to Madame, my surname was Lockton, but it tasted foul in my mouth. I shook my head. He smiled. Just Sal, then. Good day to you. Just Sal. Lucky for me, the overcast morn caused the other servants to sleep past their normal time. By the time Hannah and Mary staggered up from the cellar, I had the porridge bubbling and the tea steeping. I could not eat nor drink a thing, for my belly was tied up with fear. My thoughts chased round and round my brain pan. I could not visit the prison daily. I was sure to be caught and punished, but I had to visit the prison daily. Curzon's life depended on it. But someone would see me and was sure to remember the mark on my face. Word would get back to Madam, and she would tell Colonel Hawkins, and he would set someone to follow me, and Captain Morse would be flogged for passing on messages, and the prisoners in Curzon's cell would all be hung and buried in the pit. When I thought what they might do to me, I ran to the necessary and had me a good puking. But the next day I made my way up there again, food for the prisoners, water for the Locktons, and every once in a while a message to the gap-toothed man in the brown coat at the Golden Hill Tavern. A few nights later, there was a terrible hullabaloo between Madam and the master when he announced that he was planning to travel on the next ship to London. He would carry messages to Parliament, conduct his own business, and likely return to New York by the summer. Madam was not pleased. First she argued that he ought not go, but she argued yes, he should go, and then he should take her with him. When he refused, she threw a goblet in the fireplace and carried on so loudly that the master and Colonel Hawkins finally called for the carriage and left for a tavern. Madam dosed herself with strong wine after that and went to bed. That night the temperatures fell so far below freezing that the biggest fire could not keep away the chill. I moved my pallet as close to the hearth as I dared and sat with all my clothes, my cloak, and my blanket wrapped around me. 'Twas so cold I could not sleep. General Washington and his men were holed up in Morristown. Folks said they were in desperate need of stockings and food. I could scarce credit how hungry men with frozen feet could win a war. They were fools to even try. I waited as the clock first chimed 11 times, then 12, watching the firelight and trying not to ponder when I got up to add wood to the fire. My feet wandered themselves to the pantry, and my hands pulled the loose board there. Under the board were some sheets of newsprint I saved, the lead piece from the statue of King George, my seeds, and the book given me by the stationer. I carried the book to my warm pallet and quietly untied the twine and removed the paper wrapping. I opened the cover. A fellow named Thomas Paine wrote the little book. He called it Common Sense. Mom always said that common sense was far from common. That's why it's so special when you found it. The first sentence in the book did not seem to contain any. Some writers have so confounded society with government as to leave a little or no distinction between them, whereas they are not only different, but have different origins. Society is produced by our wants, and the government by our wickedness. It took 4 readings to figure out the meaning, which I took to be that the life of folks is different than the world what rules over them. Paine sure did dance a long time with the notion before he said it. I closed the book and longed for Robinson Crusoe, still stranded in the study where the Colonel Hawkins was asleep. I dared not rescue him. I opened the book again and attacked the next sentence. Chapter 38. Tuesday, December 24th through Wednesday, December 25th, 1776. Christmas is come, hang on the pot, let spirits turn round and ovens be hot. Beef, pork, and poultry now provide to feast thy neighbors at this tide. Then wash all down with good wine and beer, and so with mirth conclude the year. Royal Virginia Almanac. I spent the day before Christmas fighting a holly bush with a pair of scissors. Madam required its twigs and berries for her decorating schemes. My morning dash to the prison pump and tavern had gone wonderful fast. There was no new messages to pass from Curzon's companions to Captain Morse, and the doctor, secured by the rich Bridgebane family, had delivered potions and bleedings to all as promised. Curzon was spending most of his days sleeping, but he was not dead. Then it was Christmas Eve day. The holly bits were tied with pine branches and set on the sills of the street-facing windows. Glass bowls of red berries were set on small tables in the drawing-room, library, and the front parlor. Madam had 2 soldiers hang a ball of mistletoe in the front hall. This provided great merriment amongst the men and some blushing on the part of their wives. I had never seen a house decorated with tree branches to celebrate the birth of baby Jesus, but it did pretty up the place. The best was when Madam told us to hang dried rosemary throughout, that cut right through the lingering stench of boots and belchings. In keeping with tradition, I was to have Christmas Day free from work. I pondered hard on what I should do so many hours for myself. Christmas at home had meant eating Mama's bread pudding with maple syrup and nutmeg, and reading the Gospel of Matthew out loud whilst Ruth played in Mama's lap. I was miles away from celebrating like that. I tried to bury the memory, but it kept floating to the top of my mind like a cork in a stormy sea, and foolish tears spilled over. I finally decided to treat myself to a long stroll through all of New York, from the waterfront north to Chambers Street, and a side-to-side wander from the East River to the North River, which some had taken to calling the Hudson. For one day my legs would be my own, not at the beck and call of others. On Christmas morning, Lady Seymour presented me with a new pair of black leather shoes that did not pinch any of my toes. Madame gave the soldier wives each a coin. She gave me nothing. When we returned home from the service at St. Paul's Chapel, Madame explained that my day off would begin as soon as I had finished serving the midday meal. Sarah had cooked it in advance, a sirloin of beef, smoked ham, onion pie, and a plum pudding for dessert. Master and Madame both filled up on the onion pie and hardly touched the fresh baked bread. Lady Seymour ate enough for an undersized mouse. I ate porridge and beef for my Christmas dinner, a right curious combination, but a tasty one. As I cleared away the table, Madame informed me that my day off would begin after I brought in wood and washed up the dishes. Lady Seymour fired off a cannon blast of a glare at her, but Madame pretended not to notice, and the master kept his face planted in his newspaper. There had been heat rising between the two women for days. Madame was prepared to row the aunt to Charleston to get rid of her. After the meal, the master went to order the carriage to take them to some admiral's house for eggnog. Lady Seymour said she was going to rest and required nothing of me. As the lady limped to her chamber and the master disappeared down the stairs, I picked up the tray that held the last of the dishes. Madame poured herself another cup of tea. "One moment, girl," she said. I paused. "Yes, ma'am?" Madame said nothing while she stirred the sugar into her tea. She sipped, wrinkled her nose, added another spoonful, stirred, then sipped again. She set the teacup in the saucer and examined the walnut tarts on the plate before. I stood like a statue holding the tray. Would she take away the rest of my day, force me to wash the table linens or starch the master's shirts? Madame gave her tea another stir. "You've been idling around the Bridewell prison." My heart stopped. I picked up a tart, considered its scorched bottom, and returned it to the plate. "My husband's aunt said that you visit the prison at her direction, bringing table scraps not good enough for pigs. She declared that forgiving and caring for the enemy is doing the Lord's work." My heart started up again, racing so fast I thought it might escape my body. Madame picked up a second tart and scratched off the scorched bits with her knife before taking a bite. She chewed, sipped more tea, and swallowed. "My husband's aunt is a blithering idiot who has completely lost her wits. You should have told me of her request at once." She finally looked at me, her eyes as cold as coins. "You represent this house, girl. Your visits could put us under suspicion of having rebel tendencies. I will not be ruined by you, though it be through innocence, as aunt proclaims, or insolence, which I suspect. I forbid you to go to that prison." My arm shook from the weight of the tray as well as her words. She could do anything, order me to the stocks, another branding, or a public whipping of 100 lashes. She could beat me herself. She could sell me as she had done Ruth, only place me with the cruelest master, who'd work me to death in days. A pearl of sweat trickled down my cheek. Madame finished the tart and wiped the corner of her mouth with her fingertips. "While my husband's aunt lives here, my hands are tied." She reached for another tart. "But she'll be gone soon, one way or another. Elia will be in England." She popped her entire tart into her mouth, chewed, then licked her fingers. "That is the day you should fear, girl." After the carriage was left and dishes were washed and Lady Seymour was sound asleep, I started my free day, still trembling from Madame's threat. How could I get a word to Curzon that I couldn't bring food any longer? Would Dibdin let him starve if I stopped being his messenger? What if I ignored Madame's rule and continued to visit the Bridewell? I walked block after block pondering. I walked past the rope works and the brewery to the orchards on the east side, silent under the snow. I walked past houses that had letters G.R. George Rex carved into the front door, property stolen in the name of the king. Like Madame had carved the letters into my soul, burned the mark into my skin. She could do anything. I can do nothing. The ashes of sadness and the buzzing bees of my melancholy all spun a storm inside me, and I walked and walked until my new shoes rubbed blisters all over my feet, and the blisters popped. I took off the shoes and walked in the snow. Once my feet were frozen off, the blisters didn't hurt. As the sun ran for the west, rowdy songs started up in the taverns and groggeries. I found myself on the shore of the North River just above the Battery. Empty rowboats were tied up to a wharf. As the tide pulled out the ocean, they bobbed and bumped against each other. A few lights twinkled across the water in a faraway New Jersey. I thought of all the ancestors waiting at the water's edge for their stolen children to come home, waiting and waiting and waiting. A thought surfaced through my ashes. She cannot chain my soul. Yes, she could hurt me. She'd already done so. But what was one more beating? A flogging even. I would bleed or not, scar or not, live or not. But she could no longer harm Ruth, and she could not hurt my soul unless I gave it to her. This was a new notion to me, and a curious one. A group of soldiers singing loud as they could swayed down the street, very muddy in drink. I hid in the shadows until they were gone, then headed back to Wall Street. I passed several houses filled with Christmas carols, Joy to the World, and I Saw Three Ships, and the First Noel. A fat candle glowed on a parlor windowsill of a house on a corner, set there to guide someone home. The Locktons and Lady Seymour were all retired for the night by the time I returned. The house was still empty of soldiers and their wives. I built up the fire in the hearth, set my shoes and damp stockings to dry in front of it, and rubbed a Kendula salve on my blisters. Christmas, Mama's voice reminded. Keep Christmas. For the second time on the very same day, tears threatened. I rubbed them away and vowed not to cry again. 'Twas a nuisance. I found myself studying the loaf of bread on the table. A sharp knife showed up in my hand, and the loaf was soon cut into fat slices. A chipped crockery bowl appeared from the pantry alongside the butter and eggs and milk in the sugar loaf, and the nutmeg grater in the small amber flask. I baked me a maple syrup bread pudding in the Rhode Island style. While it cooked, I cleaned myself up good and proper. I thought about stealing a piece of Madame's rose-scented soap, but that would have made me smell like her. I preferred to smell like strong lye. I washed my arms and legs, and the back of my neck, and my ears and my face, and I dried myself with a soft, clean rag. I frowned as I stepped back into my clothes. I'd grown some, and they didn't fit proper. I'd let out the seams of the bodice as much as I could and taken out the hem of my skirt. Much more growing, and it'd look a right scandal. But I wouldn't think on that now. I was trying to make it Christmas. I pulled on my dry stockings and stepped into my new shoes, even though they rubbed fierce and popped blisters. I put the bowl of bread pudding into a basket, tied on my cloak, and wound up my hands in rags to keep the frost from biting. I walked out the back door. It was not yet midnight, so in truth, 'twas still the day I could call my own. I set my path westward on the burned-over district to Canvastown. The line where September's fire had stopped was sharp cut. First a house with no damage, next a house still bearing black streaks of soot and smoke. Then a field of ruin, with makeshift hovels crafted from tent, brick, and scorched timbers. Rats nibbled on frozen garbage heaps. The smell of fire still lingered, tainted with the smell of filth and decay. But in the blackness there were spots of hope. A wreath was stuck on the front of a tent. Children's clothes hung from a clothesline, stiff with ice, but still sweet-looking. A butter churn stood watched over a neat stack of fresh split wood. Smoke swirled slow from the top of a chimney, dipped at the roofline, then rose up to the stars. I lifted my face to the sky, and for the first time in much too long, I prayed. I prayed as hard as I could, without words or shapes or fancy talking. I just prayed. When I was done, I felt cleaner than I had after my bath. I walked on until I found a hut built against a lone brick wall. From inside came sounds of family, the papa's low rumble, the mama's bright laugh, and giggling children who had been allowed to stay up much too late and who did not want to fall asleep. I greeted them through the piece of canvas that served as their front door. The hovel fell silent, then the canvas was pushed aside and the father stepped out, a musket in his hand. His wife came right behind him, though he told her to stay inside. It took some convincing to explain my mission, but I spoke polite and firm and held out the bread pudding, and the children snuck out in their nightclothes and just about dove into the bowl. The mother took the basket and said, "Thank you," and then "Thank you" again, and then "Thank you most kindly," and they went back inside. I hummed a carol as I walked away, finally feeling at peace.